be trying to find that person before you need that person, so that when you do need that person, you've got a number of people in your network you could potentially call on.
Hi everybody, in today's episode we have with us Ryan Lunka. Ryan is the co-founder and CEO of Blended Edge, helping software teams deliver integrations faster, easier, and more cost effectively. In today's episode we covered a lot of technical stuff about integrations, APIs, which platform should you choose when you're just building your e-commerce store, and when do you know you should start scaling and thinking about different technical solutions.
Welcome to the EcomXFactor podcast, where it's all about launching and scaling your business using sales funnels, automations, and smart marketing. And now, please welcome your host, the founder of EcomXFactor, Yaron Bin.
Hi Ryan, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to this talk. I'm actually encountering a lot of integration problems on my end at the moment before we hopped on the call. So maybe we can cover this stuff as well.
They can be a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, and when you don't have developing background, as I don't, it becomes so much more challenging because you don't know what you don't know. And should I hire this guy? Shouldn't I hire this guy? Maybe I can solve this with a plugin. Maybe I should migrate. So a lot of confusing stuff when you don't know exactly what you choose.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a good setup for the conversation that we're hopefully going to have here, because I'm sure there's a lot of merchants out there listening that have a similar problem. So we'll hopefully get them that kind of base level of information they need to be successful.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, our goal today is have like integrations 101, give people a general idea of what is integrations, how to integrate, how to plan for integration. I know some people that listen to the beginning of the podcast might be frightened or think it's not relevant to me, but integration is very relevant because at the end of the day, you need to integrate a lot of moving parts in your business. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe further down the line.
Yeah, and I would bet that a lot of folks are doing integration and not even really realizing they're doing it because it just doesn't say that in the same words necessarily. But and if you're installing a plugin on your store to a third-party system of some kind for email marketing or for reporting or any number of things you would do there, you're doing integration.
Exactly.
It's just a very specific kind of it.
Yeah, and it has become so easy and so seamless, so people don't even realize things are happening on the back end. And you also need to dedicate thought into choosing which app or which plugin you're going to choose. So
yeah. In some ways, it's become a lot easier, and in some ways, it's still very, very difficult. And we'll talk through the nuances of what those differences are.
Cool. Okay, before we get going, can you tell us a bit about your background story, and how you got into this field? And
sure. I am the co-founder and CEO of Blended Edge, and we are a pretty new startup. We just started 6 or 7 months ago. Our go-to-market here is that we actually primarily help software companies build out their integrations to other products. So if you ever use a product, an e-commerce product or marketing technology product or anything, any business software that you've signed up for, and they have integrations that you can kind of turn on in the admin interface for them. And sometimes they might have a whole marketplace of a library of searchable integrations, like an app store kind of experience. We help those software companies build out those types of features. But prior to that, because this is a fairly new business for us, I worked for a different software company. I was the head of product and the chief operating officer for a company called nChannel. And what we did was had a cloud-based integration platform that served primarily e-commerce merchants. We worked with some distributors, some brick and mortar retailers as well. And really what we would do is sit in between e-commerce websites, ERP systems or accounting systems, point of sale systems. Sometimes if you had, 3PLs on the back end that you were using for fulfillment, we could just sit in there and pass data between all those different software products to help merchants automate all those parts of their business. And, we typically worked with, mid-market on up size merchants, but had a lot of different experiences helping, all kinds of brands get integrated in some complex ways.
Can you give an example of a use case of people that came to just to people to further understand, because you threw, like, for some people it might sound like buzzwords. What is 3PL? What is so
yeah,
share
I
a
think
use case.
the most common use case that we addressed was and it was usually around the time that a merchant grew to the point where they needed an ERP. And if you're not using ERP, it's you're probably using QuickBooks for your accounting system early in your business, and some people go pretty far using QuickBooks. But an easy way to think about an ERP is it's like QuickBooks on steroids with a whole bunch of operational stuff built into it too. So it also, in addition to being your accounting system, is also the system you're using to fulfill your orders, and you might even be, running your warehouse on that ERP and things like that. It tends to be they tend to sell them as if they do everything for your business. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. But, we usually found that when you got to about $1 million in revenue, that was around the time you were starting to look at more advanced e-commerce offerings like a Shopify Plus versus a Shopify or a Magento Enterprise versus an open source. And your operations were complex enough that you were maybe looking at moving from, kind of a basic accounting system or just using the back end of your e-commerce platform and starting to run your business primarily on your ERP. So that was where we would kind of step in and say, okay, well, now if you've got this ERP in place that's responsible for your accounting and responsible for the logistics around fulfilling your orders, but the orders are getting placed in your e-commerce website, and these are two separate pieces of software. So we would sit in between there. When orders were placed on the front end website, we would pick those up and we'd send them to the ERP. So they'd also show up in the ERP. And then your fulfillment team would do the pick, pack, ship, and do all the things that they need to do on the back end to get that order fulfilled. And then we would send, when they're in the ERP doing that, they'd put like their shipping and tracking information in so that the merchant knows what to look for. And we would sync that information back out to the e-commerce platform so that the end customer could actually see what was happening with their order. And there are certainly a lot more things that we would do in these integrations, but that was sort of the fundamental base use case that we would kind of build the rest of our offering around. Because if you sell products online, placing orders and fulfilling the orders is sort of the fundamental thing you do. So that kind of accomplished it for everybody. We do things like, your ERP usually holds on to your inventory counts, how much you have in stock of different product SKUs. So we would send that out to the e-commerce platform as frequently as possible, ideally close to real time. So if your website says you have 10 in stock, that's actually accurate and you don't sell 12 of them. We would, if there's some returns processing and some of that kind of stuff, we could help with that. So there's a simple version of how you can integrate for an e-commerce merchant, and then it can get more and more and more complicated as your business does.
Yeah, so in e-commerce business, there are a lot of moving parts. So, for example, you said the inventory, you have the shipping, the tracking data, you have the payment gateways, you have the customer support, you have the CRM, you have the live support, the help desk, you have the email marketing, SMS, a lot of moving parts. And I wanted to touch upon something that you mentioned, so you didn't mention a certain ERP, but you said they claim they do X, but they not necessarily do X. And this is something that is very difficult. So when let's say I want to choose a plugin for my WooCommerce store or an app for my Shopify store. So they claim something, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what they claim is what they're able to do. This is one problem. And the other aspect of the problem is, even if they are doing what they say they're doing, it's not necessarily that they are the right solution for the other apps and plugins that I have on my backend. So
yeah. I mean, it's a never-ending game of trying to differentiate between the marketing message and then what they actually accomplish. Now, when it's a smaller kind of point solution that does one specific thing, if that's what they're advertising they do, that's what they do. But if it's a kind of a big product suite, it's usually built around some core capabilities, and then they kind of bolt on these other things that they say they do so that they can check off the boxes when they're trying to make a sale. It depends on where you're at in your business. If you're very, very early on, usually the kind of plug-in model where you just find something in an app store, that's a pretty good place to start, because really you're running your business on the e-commerce platform more than likely. You're using WooCommerce's backend or Shopify's backend or something like that for your main reporting and Again, maybe you have it connected to QuickBooks or something, but
Mm-hmm.
nothing terribly complicated. There's no reason to go through these big, huge integration projects and evaluate these complicated technologies to sit alongside that, because you're just not there as a business yet. So that's a good place to start. But as you get, more complex operationally, you tend to get a little overwhelmed with plugins, and then the plugins don't really work all that well together, and you're actually making things harder for yourself because you're trying to simplify them. And then you need to kind of go through that, V2 of your technology stack and decide what you want to change and how you want to streamline things.
So how do you guys approach this? I saw it in your website that you have like a process which you follow. So let's say I'm starting to feel overwhelmed. My WooCommerce website is, I don't know, I'm not able to integrate all the moving parts. The page loading time is slow. I have like the Facebook pixel isn't firing the correct number of events. The inventory isn't correlated with the numbers my supplier has. What should I do now?
Man, there's a lot there.
No, but how do you approach this?
Yeah. So look, if you're getting to that point where your business is growing revenue, and it's becoming complex enough that the things that you've tried to bolt onto your e-commerce site are starting to be a little painful to work with, that's usually a good sign, because that means the thing's working, right? You're selling product, your brand is resonating with folks. So that's maybe a sign that you're ready to get to that next level. So one of the first things that I think is important to do is that make sure you have strong technology partners to work with to help you get to that next level. Your first and probably most important relationship is going to be the agency, or sometimes they call themselves SIs, that is kind of taking some technical ownership of your website and building the templates, and oftentimes helping you assemble those other technologies on the back end, because they're gonna be the most equipped to sort of handle the front end of your brand, point it out to the world. And when you're looking for a good agency to work with, you certainly want to have one that either knows the e-commerce platform that you are going to continue to work with, if you're already in WooCommerce and you want to stay there, or if you're asking them to bring you recommendations for where should I go, that they're very competent with that platform, but that they should also have a really good awareness of the other technologies in that ecosystem. If they're a Shopify developer, they should know the Shopify apps that most growth-focused merchants are using, and know what the pros and cons are, and be able to recommend what you should bring in place. And then third, they should also be reasonably able to help with integration, or at least understand what their role is in an integration project, because you may be at the point where you are going to have to go through some integration projects to other systems. If you have data concerns, in addition to like optimizing the front end of your store, because a lot of what you said was optimizing the front end of the store, and some of it's related to plugins, but some of it's like you just need to have it well built. That's when you have to start thinking about, well, if I'm syncing data with these other things and that's not going well for me, if my inventory is not updating quickly enough from wherever it's being tracked elsewhere, what are we going to do about that? And yeah, your options are, one, you can look at, does the thing that you are using for managing your inventory, to just keep rolling with that example, does it have a native plugin to the e-commerce platform I'm using? I'm using X inventory management system. Can I go to the Shopify app store and download the app for X inventory management system, and it just knows how to natively talk to Shopify? Sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not. If it's not the case, you have to ask the question, does this system I'm using for inventory management have an API? We can dive into a little bit about what an API is here shortly, but for right now, does it have an API? Because if it does, that opens up the possibility that now I can go find specifically an integration piece of software that kind of is that middleman that passes data between my different systems. There's a lot of options for that range from, tens of dollars a month all the way to, tens of thousands of dollars a month, depending on what your needs are. And we can dive into that as well. But those are the sorts of questions you should be asking. Your agency can be very, very helpful in helping you navigate some of these things, especially if they're a little heavier on the tech side. However, sometimes it makes sense to have like a technology consultant who can work alongside, almost like a CTO who can work alongside of you to help you make these decisions. If depending on how you're staffing your team, you may be hiring a tech team full time or an IT team full time to kind of run this for you. But it is kind of important that you at that stage of your business, you start to have technology focused people who can help you align that tech stack to what your business objectives are.
Do you have like any threshold in mind that people should start considering, like hiring more, even though I assume it's like an organic and a gradual process, but let's say most of the customers that came to you in the last company that you worked, they had like $1 million revenue, monthly revenue, or less, or like a benchmark more or less.
Yeah, there's not a hard rule about when you should be thinking about these things. And quite honestly, if you plan to have a successful business, even really, really early, you should be starting to think about these things early and often. But some general things that we would see, usually around about $1 million in revenue is give or take the point in time where some of these questions were coming up. Around the time people would start to look at something like a Shopify Plus versus a Shopify or Magento Enterprise versus something open sourced or the community edition, whatever it was called. Around the time they're implementing actual backend software, and that might be an ERP or it might be an order management platform, or they might be starting to work with a third-party logistics provider that uses a warehouse management system, it's just another company that'll basically handle your order fulfillment for you. When those sorts of conversations are coming up in your business, that's usually kind of the trigger point for when, really having tech stack conversations and thinking about what your integration strategy is going to start to be important.
I see. And you mentioned planning ahead. So a lot of time, when you just begin, you don't know if you should build to scale or just start with the quickest and most, like create an MVP. So some people even start building on a Wix website, which is not scalable at all, but they claim to be scalable. I hope they, never mind. So how do you know if exactly if you should like aim for plan like for scaling, or how do you exactly you approach this?
So if you're very early in your bit, let's just say you're starting an e-commerce company today from scratch. You have a good product, or you're working on developing one, and you're going to start bringing it to market online. I would very highly recommend that you start with a best practice e-commerce, specifically e-commerce platform. Something like Shopify, maybe BigCommerce, maybe something like WooCommerce. But the problem with the folks like WooCommerce or Wix or some of these other products is they are e-commerce and they're a whole bunch of other things. They're a website platform first, and then they say, yes, we can also do a subset of websites that are e-commerce websites. I would recommend you just start out of the gate with a dedicated e-commerce website. Nobody's building blogs on Shopify. They're only building e-commerce stores on Shopify. So that sets you up for a little bit more success and fewer complicated conversations as you start to grow. Now, the trade-off there is sometimes when you're early in a business like this, you have these preferences about how your site looks or these strong opinions about how it should work. And I would encourage you to take a step back and assume that the dedicated e-commerce platforms that have made a lot of people successful doing this actually know better than you a little bit. So be willing to make a little bit of concession about how you think you want to run the business and how you think you want the front end of the website to look and how you think you want these things to operate, and try to work around how that platform works in its best practice manner. Don't work against it. And I think all of this sets you up for success, because now you've actually got a platform that you can grow your business on for a long time. And you're not going to get to this point where you have to do this complicated data migration. And I've done a bunch of those. I can tell you an e-commerce migration is really, really painful. And what you're doing is you're allowing yourself to learn from the best practices that are kind of encoded into these dedicated e-commerce platforms, So it's actually sort of obligating you into doing things that are probably the right thing to do anyway.
Yeah, I totally I get your point, and I agree, because let's say, for example, some people complain that the Shopify checkout isn't customizable, but on the other hand, Shopify builds this based on the best practices, and they see the conversion rates, and you can bet your ass that they did optimize this and split test this in order for it to be profitable and convert. So there's no
100%. 100%. I would be very hard pressed to believe that you know better than the Shopify product team about how they should have a checkout structured. And I know you may not love the way it looks, but they know how the hell to make people buy products on websites.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about integrations when you're like a solopreneur or you have a small team and you use an integration tool like Zapier, or there's a lot of different solutions out there, but Zapier, I guess, is the most popular. So what exactly do these tools provide?
Yeah, there's two tools that are kind of, I would call the entry-level integration providers that are out there. So, and again, this is not plugging in another product to your e-commerce store to integrate it, which is a version of integration. This is, I've got separate systems that don't natively talk to one another. So I got to put something in between them to make data go back and forth so that they do, through this third party, they talk to one another. And the two kind of entry-level ones are if this, then that. And if this, then that isn't used in businesses as often, it can do some business stuff. It's a little bit more of a personal automation integration platform. And then there's Zapier is by far the most popular, most well-known one. And really, you know, you'll see the words integration and you'll see the words automation quite a bit. And it's a little bit of marketing fluff. It's kind of saying the same thing, but automation is pointing a little bit more toward the business value you get from using it versus the technical thing that it's doing. But in all these cases, these are literally just pulling data out of one system and pushing data to the other system. And they're doing it in both directions to make some business process that you have that uses both of those two technologies kind of flow nicely.
Yeah.
So Zapier, so their market presence is one where they say, look, we've got the ability to talk to like thousands of different products. Like you would be hard pressed to find a piece of software that's reasonably well adopted that doesn't already have a Zapier connector out there. And their whole, you know, premise is if we have a connector to this one and we have a connector to this one, it's super easy to make them talk to each other through our system. And for a lot of use cases, it works great. They're all about breadth, but they're not about depth. So if you have fairly basic data integration use cases, Zapier is great for it. You won't have to go searching far and wide for a platform that has connectors to the systems that you use. It's a little technical to set up, but relative to the rest of the market, it's not that technical. It is oriented towards somebody who is not an integration expert, who's not a software developer, who is not a techie, so that they can set these things up fairly easily. Then from there, there's a whole spectrum of similar products that fundamentally do the same thing, which is sit in between software products and move data between them, that scale all the way from the complexity of Zapier to enterprise, really, really complicated, millions of dollars a year type of products. And as you kind of assess your needs and where you are as a business, you're probably going to eventually evolve away from Zapier if you get big and complex enough, but maybe you do, maybe you don't. And deciding, which one of those other products is the right fit for you really depends on your needs and where you are technically and who you have on your team to deal with and stuff like that. There's a lot of variables there.
And where do you guys fit in? Your guys' solution?
Yeah, we're actually a little bit different. So we are not necessarily the third party middleman integrator. That's what the company I used to work for, that's what we used to do. But at Blended Edge, we're actually saying, well, that market's always going to exist. There's always going to be the need for somebody, a third party to do this on somebody's behalf. But the market that is actually most underserved is helping the software companies themselves, the point solutions, they're the end solutions that you're using, the fulfillment systems, the e-commerce platforms, the marketing systems, helping them build native integrations to other products so that they can say, yes, we already connect to Shopify, or yes, we already connect to NetSuite, or we already connect to this other system that you have here. So you don't need a third party, because there's a lot of reasons where you wouldn't want to involve a third party, and they can grow a little further with their customers if they don't have to ask you to go use a third party to integrate. So we help those companies with those types of things.
What are the disadvantages of using a third, a middleman, like the third party?
Yeah, I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages to that model. On one hand, it's great if you have a third party that has all the connectors you need to the different systems you have, and they have, if the product works well and doesn't drop data on the floor, and it works, quickly, it can really solve a lot of problems for you. It also sort of gives you this almost like a central point of visibility on your business. So if all the data about your business is flowing through the same place, it almost gives you a little bit of a hub to look to about what's happening with your business. And it can simplify some growth because you just kind of plug more stuff into it as you evolve. On the other hand, there's an added cost, right? So Zapier is not very expensive necessarily, but again, it's also not necessarily always very deep in terms of what it can handle. So as you start to get into more complex integrations and you need a different type of product, you might be paying $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, and $5,000 to $20,000 for projects to get these implementations for integrations done. You're not necessarily going to have to spend that much, but you may. So there's a cost benefit there. It might cost a lot of money. The other thing to kind of factor in there, and this is again why it makes a lot of sense for you to early and often have strong technical people in your corner that are paid to be on your side, so to speak. There's a lot of really great integrators out there. There's a lot of really great integration platforms out there. There's also a lot of really crappy ones. And you as an e-commerce merchant who doesn't have a tech background is probably not really equipped to tell the difference. So you run a little bit of a risk of putting a lot of faith for a mission critical thing that has to happen with your business in somebody's hands who isn't really qualified to do that well. And you should constantly be able to assess the money that's going out for that capability. Is it coming back to me in benefit? Is it costing me headaches? Are they dropping data on the floor? And you go back to that order use case, right? If you've hired somebody to make sure that whenever somebody places an order in your website, it makes it into your order fulfillment system, every single order that doesn't make it there is revenue that you can't collect because you didn't fulfill the order, and you have an unhappy customer. And that's a major problem for you. That is fundamentally dropping the ball on the one thing that you are in the world to do, which is take orders and fulfill them. So you're really putting a lot of faith in this third party middleman, and you want to make sure that it's somebody who's gonna deliver for you, and deliver for you in a way that is appropriate relative to their cost.
So you later on you suggested having also like somebody like this, and also having maybe a consultant, non-biased consultant. So how do you choose? How do you get the non-biased consultant?
That's a hard one, because I mean, and it's not just e-commerce businesses. Everybody is constantly looking for their technical co-founder, right? Their CTO, and it's because that's a very in-demand skill set that those people get paid pretty well. So honestly, the probably annoyingly simple answer is networking. Be trying to find that person before you need that person, so that when you do need that person, you've got a number of people in your network you could potentially call on. You will find folks in the ecosystem who can do that. Again, a lot of times, if you have a good agency that's helping you with your website and they're strong technically, they're not just a design agency, but they have a strong technology capability as well, that's worth its weight in gold. So maintain that relationship and try to keep them as a strategic partner. When it comes to integration, and we haven't gotten into this yet, there's sort of two ways or two types of companies you'll work with to be that third party middleman. And one is they're called integration platform as a service. and that's or iPaaS is the abbreviated version of that,
Mhm.
and that's what Zapier is, although they probably wouldn't market themselves as such. And that's what all these other software products that you'd pay a monthly subscription to, who handle different versions of that problem for you. You might work with them, and or you might work with these companies that are typically called solution integrators, and they are more of a professional services organization or a custom coding, custom building organization that will help you either use the iPaaS or will build out integrations for you custom. Now, I generally would recommend you don't have people building things out for you custom unless you have a really, really specific idea to do it. But sometimes having that SI in your corner can be your sort of technical consultant that can help you navigate all these complicated decisions about what software you're going to use for what purpose and how you make it all play nicely together. Again, it's going to cost money. Those people don't do that for free, but that can be the type of third-party technology partner you can have in your corner to help you make some of these decisions.
I love the point that you mentioned about trying to find someone and via networking, because I think it's very, very important. But you also mentioned like a word of warning, and I think that we should dive deeper into this and maybe even put like an exclamation mark about not necessarily running to have someone to customize anything or any integrations. Can you elaborate why?
Yeah. It's because integration is really hard and it's expensive and complicated to manage. So the advantages you get by having a pre-built integration, and that might mean an app that plugs into another app or natively talks to the other app, or it might be using an integration platform like we mentioned, like a Zapier or something more complex, that you probably have to configure some things, but it still has kind of a fundamental platform that does the most of the work. And it has a connector that is used by a lot of different customers to talk to that endpoint system. You eliminate a lot of the complexity that inevitably exists in integration. When you're moving a whole bunch of data back and forth between software systems, stuff goes wrong all the time. There's no avoiding it. That's just life. So you want to work with technology that limits the amount of times that's going to happen. And when it does happen, escalates that to you and your tech team or the people who are babysitting the integration, so to speak, so they know that it happened. Go back to the order example. If 2% of your orders are not making it back to your fulfillment system and you don't know about it, that's a much bigger problem than if you do know about it, right? Because you don't even know what you don't know at that point.
Exactly.
So being able to escalate that visibility and then giving you a path forward to help you deal with that. These products that do this natively, or if it's a well-built integration for a direct software integration where, a plug-in, so to speak, that's all built in and you get that kind of as part of the package. If you're going to custom build it, you're going to hire somebody to do all of that, to think through not only your business cases and what data do I need to move to what system to accomplish my business goals, but also how do I build all this complicated infrastructure underneath it to actually make that happen, so that when things do fall on the floor, that's elevated out. We have paths to deal with data exceptions. We know it's going to reliably move data. Like there's so many things that can go wrong there. You don't want to hire somebody to reinvent that wheel. It's like it's similar to, if you're going to build an e-commerce website, you don't hire somebody to build a payment processor. You use a payment processor that already exists, because it's such a complicated thing to build that it's not worth your time and investment or the risk you're adding to your business by paying somebody to build it. So if you're not a massive enterprise, again, top 500 retailer, and you're saying, well, my use cases are so unique that I need a custom integration that is completely unique to what I'm doing, I'm going to push back pretty hard. And look, maybe you're doing something very, very innovative with your business model. Maybe you're doing something that's never been done before. But I'm guessing if you're an e-commerce merchant, that's probably not true. You're probably following a script or a similar model that's been done many, many times before. And there's no reason you should be paying somebody to customize software to accomplish that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's all good when it's working. But once, let's say you need to update and this guy goes ahead and demands more money, or you stop working, and then you're kind of stuck with the integration or the solutions that he built, and you're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah.
So this is something that you'd like to avoid for sure. So this is also.
Yeah, I mean, that it talks to cost of ownership for an integration is high, because you have to make sure you maintain a bench of people who know how that integration works and know how to maintain it for you. Because if they all disappear on you and stuff starts to break, you're in trouble. Now this is true of literally any software project. This is true of the front end website that somebody's going to build for you, and that's why I said it's very important that you have a good relationship and a long-standing relationship with your agency. But that is the kind of thing that you want to invest in. You do want to invest in how your brand is reflected on the front end of your website, because that is unique to your business. That's a big part of your business. There's nothing about your brand more than likely that has anything to do with how data moves between APIs behind the scenes. And that's why the quote unquote customization money you spend shouldn't be on things like integration. It should be on things like front end website development, marketing materials, forward facing things that represent the uniqueness of your company.
I agree, because I guess at the end of the day, e-commerce doesn't have to be so complicated on the back end. Correct me if I'm wrong, but things are kind of straightforward if you're not huge and you don't have many points of sales and many different domains and selling multi-currency. If you just have a few stores, you don't need to overcomplicate it, I guess.
Don't complicate it until you have to complicate it, because complication is just expensive. And that's why I really like the Shopify's and the BigCommerces of the world that have kind of an opinionated way about how you should do it, and put you in a little bit of a box, because they know what they're doing and they know how to give you the right functionality to make you successful. And it might be 90% or 80% of overall what you think you want to do with the business. But if you get really good at that 80%, you're going to be a successful business.
Agree. Let's talk about some common misconceptions that you think that, or some general rule of thumbs that when listeners hearing to this talk, they should keep in mind when they are building to scale or for integrations. Like, do you have any common misconception you think about?
I think so. Yeah, there's one that really comes to mind here. You're going to evaluate the platform that you put your e-commerce website on. You're going to evaluate all these other software products that you may bring into your business for different parts of your operation. And as your business grows and as you get more complex, there's going to be more and more of those things. You should, as an absolute qualifier for any of these technologies, it should be that they have an API. And it ideally would be a modern, well-documented, what's called a REST API. And so let's talk about what API means a little bit here.
And what is a REST API as well?
Exactly. So API sounds like a technical thing, and application programming interface, I believe, is what that stands for. It's been so long since I've called it anything but an API. And it's really actually not that complicated. So if you think about what you do as a user of a piece of software, you point and click on things on a user interface on a screen, right? There's buttons and there's fields you fill out forms for, and there's things you do to interact with the software. That user interface is how a human interacts with software. An API is just how another software product or another computer interacts with the software. And oftentimes the things that the operations you can do or the things you can do on the API very closely mimic the things you can do in the UI. So I click a button, it submits a new product into my system. There's an API, a portion of the API for pushing a new product into the system. So when you have to make software talk to one another, there's no person doing that. There's no person in the middle clicking buttons, because that's too expensive. Humans cost a lot of money. So you want software in the middle that's automating the button clicking, so to speak. And the way it's doing that is it's having a conversation with the API of the software product. A REST API is a specific type of API. There's a lot of different ones out there that have evolved over the years. For a long time, SOAP Web Services was kind of the de facto standard for how you should build an API. But really for the last, I'd say 10 years, give or take, REST APIs have been sort of the best practice standard that most software companies put in place. It's probably not worth getting into the technical details about what REST is, but suffice it to say, a REST API is an API based on a standard that the majority of technology people will be able to understand and know how to intuitively interact with. So if it's reasonably well documented and it adheres to the standards of REST, then somebody who has no context for what that product does or has never worked with it before can be pretty dangerous working with the API, because they see familiar patterns, they know what's there. So why does any of this matter? It's because you're eventually going to get into projects where you have to make all these software products that you are buying talk to one another, and you want to simplify those products as much as you can. If they all have well-documented modern APIs, you simplify those integration projects. If you use old archaic systems that don't have APIs and require custom integration, which we already talked about is complicated, or have weird, hard to understand legacy interfaces, not modern REST APIs or modern API, there's other versions of modern ones you can have, then it makes these integration projects more complicated. It limits the number of third-party partners that you can work with to get them done, because there's fewer people who understand how to do that well, and it adds risk to your business. The other thing you should be looking for when you're evaluating these technologies, and this usually comes part and parcel with somebody that has an API, is just buy cloud-based software. Software as a service, subscription-based software. Don't be provisioning servers and trying to host things in your own firewall and trying to host an IT environment. It's just not worth the investment. There are so many good products that do so many different things where you just sign up for a subscription and they host everything for you. It's just generally not worth it unless you are a large enterprise to take on that burden. So look for software products that are subscription-based or cloud-based, so you can just kind of sign up for, and they have a good pricing model that you can align to your business goals and your expense structure.
And this is also something that is worth checking, because sometimes when you buy some sort of a subscription, you need to see the pricing model, if it's based on the tasks or based on the usage, or what exactly is the pricing model. Because sometimes if you want to scale, you'll figure out that the solution that you're considering might be very expensive in a few weeks' time, because you're going to start scaling. For example, Zapier is task-based, and at a certain level, it becomes way more expensive unless you choose the enterprise solution, which I don't know exactly what they are charging, but this is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, if it's just because it's software as a service doesn't mean it's just a flat fee subscription by the number of features you're using. Many products do charge on usage, and it might be how much data you're moving across, like how many tasks is what you're right, Zapier calls it. It might be something like, if it's an order processing system, it might be a percentage of the value of the orders that you're placing, or just a straight order count. It might be relative to the number of users that you have seats to have access to the system. So there's a lot of different pricing models that you'll need to be aware exist. And I mean, at this point, it's just basic ROI calculation to think about what's this look like day one, what's this look like a year or 3 years from now, and just sort of model out what that pricing probably looks like, and make sure that you're netting a 5 or 10x return on the money you're putting into investing in that software product. And if it's a quick little inexpensive one that you're just kind of signing up for, you're probably not going to have a salesperson. But if it's a reasonably expensive software product, you're probably talking to a salesperson. You should be challenging them to help you build the business case for how is that software product, how's the investment you're going to make in their product going to net you. You really should be saying a 10x return on your investment. And if they can't help you articulate that, that should be a sign that maybe that's not a good partner to be working with and bringing into your business.
10x is really the benchmark that you would choose.
It's a high standard. I think 5x would be an appropriate one. But think about, you have limited funds in your business, and this is true of any business. What good does it do you if a dollar you put into an effort and the time you put into an effort just gets you $1 back? You're treading water, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a growth focused company, you should have a strong standard or a high bar for any investment you're going to make in your business. And that's a new employee, that's a new software product you're going to bring in, that's a new, consulting partner like an agency, for how those dollars that you spend on that are going to move you forward at least fivefold. But I think you should strive to hold everybody accountable to a tenfold kind of ROI. And it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to get 10 times more sales.
Yeah.
our ROI might be achieved in intangible ways like brand value and things like that. And it might be achieved in cost savings.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
likely it's some combination of a few things, but you should be thinking in that growth mindset about, if I'm going to put $1 in, I better get $10 back out.
Yeah, I totally agree. I want to start wrapping things up, and I want to ask you like a free rapid fire questions.
Sure.
Feel free to answer them quickly or slowly, whatever. You mentioned the software. So are there any softwares that you started using lately that made a big impact on your life, or maybe mobile apps, not necessarily about the topics that we discussed, but just in general?
Yeah, actually. So I've grown increasingly weary of products that monetize by selling my data for advertising. And honestly, I think because SEO has become so good, Google is getting limited in its ability to be a good search tool for me in a lot of ways. So I signed up for the alpha for a product called Neva. And it's a few guys that spun out of Google, and they're trying to fundamentally rebuild the search experience. And it's an early product, and you have to sign up and get accepted into their alpha program. But so far, it's a pretty cool product. And one of their fundamental parts of their mission is that they are not going to monetize by selling data.
So what exactly do they do? I never expected this as an answer, which is cool.
It's it's a search engine. If you looked at it, it'd be familiar to you if you're familiar with Google. Yeah. But it does their algorithm for what search results they give you is different. And they don't have ads. There's no, like when you look at Google, half the things you see there are paid Google ads. They're just not doing that.
So how so they're expecting to monetize via subscription, or?
I think so. It's tough to tell. It's early in their business, and I heard about it on a podcast. So it's it's something that I'm interested in playing around with and giving them feedback early on their product. And I don't know how many people they accept into the program, but it was pretty easy for me to get in there, and I'm not that important. So if it's something you're interested in, go check it out. But I'm pretty bullish on it in the week or so I've been using it.
Cool. And you mentioned podcasts, and any favorite podcast or books that you follow or suggest for people who want to get a bit more technical and understand a bit more about integrations, API, stuff like that?
Yeah, there's not a lot of integration podcasts out there that I'm aware of that are not going to be pretty in the weeds, techie, and kind of dry. I really like, just in general, just to understand what's happening in the tech ecosystem, I'm a big fan of Pivot with Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher. And Kara Swisher has been a very highly regarded tech journalist for a long time. And Scott Galloway is like my favorite dude in the world right now. He's a really smart, funny guy. He does a lot of really interesting things, and they have a podcast together. In terms of a more techie podcast, I tend to listen to a lot of kind of startup oriented podcasts. So This Week in Startups is a really good one, hosted by one of the most successful angel investors like ever. He's like very early in Uber and some of these guys, and his personality is a little tough to get past initially, but
who is
very
it?
educational.
What's his name?
Jason Calacanis.
Okay.
But especially if you're interested in the tech world and understanding what goes into building software businesses, not so much the coding part of it, but those are, that's a pretty good podcast too.
Cool. Awesome. Great. And where can people reach out to you guys and hear more about you and your services?
Yeah. blendededge.com is our website. We do have a blog on there. And again, our audience is more software companies who need to build out integrations, but even for a merchant who is thinking about getting into integration projects, some of our blog content about like how you run an integration project is probably helpful. So definitely check that out. My social media of most usage is either Twitter, and I'm at Ryan Lunka, RyanLunka, or I'm on LinkedIn, and I do a lot of content on LinkedIn as well.
Cool.
Blended Edge is also on both of those platforms. Just a little bit more marketing material there. But yeah, come say hey. Let me know if I can help with anything, or certainly if you're a software company who is thinking about how you build out your integration strategy or your actual product features for it as well. Reach out and we can talk about helping you.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Ryan. It's been a pleasure and a lot of interesting stuff. I learned a lot of stuff to digest and think about. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, totally, man. It's been a good hour.
Awesome. Great. Bye. Take care.
Thank you.